To practice a few details for your Picasso portrait, we're going to do a little exercise focusing on how artists, maybe at least mentally, think about going from a realistic image to a simplified image and to an abstract image. So at the top of your practice paper, I'm going to have you write those 3 words: realistic, simplified, and abstract. I'll divide my paper, and then we'll draw a facial feature to represent those 3 different categories. A lot of artists like Picasso were trained to draw very realistically. So it's not that they couldn't draw realistically, they just made artistic choices to do things differently. The first thing we're going to do is a realistic eye. So follow along. If we think of a realistic eye shape, think of kind of that almond shape, almost like a football shape. And as you're drawing this, if certain details are hard to follow along with, just do your best to include realistic details. Next up I'm going to add is the eyelid. And then you'll go in and add the pupil and the iris. The pupil is the black circle in the center of your eye. I'm going to go ahead and color that in. Then the iris, I'm going to shade that in kind of like rays of a sun or flower petals, starting from the center and working your way out. I'm going to leave a little bit of white space to make it look a little more reflective. And then as a realistic detail, you can go in and you can add eyelashes. And I drew mine really lightly just so they wouldn't distract from the rest of the shape. If I'm going to take that same shape and simplify it, I still have some of those basic details. So if I'm making a decision as an artist to simplify my picture, I can take some details away, but it's still going to look like an eye. So that'd be an example of a simplified eye. When we abstract it, this is where we start changing the placement, we start changing the shape, we start changing the size of things. So instead of that football shape, maybe I'll think more like a diamond shape. So the details might still be there. You could still have an eyelid. Maybe now, though, the iris and pupil are square or rectangular. So the shapes are starting to be changed. When you're working on your abstract eye, you can certainly do it in a different way, but this is just an example of how you can include those same details, but do them in a new way. So you can see kind of the progression. For a nose, if I were to draw a realistic nose, I would pay attention to kind of those basic shape details. I would go in and probably add some shading. Shading makes things look very realistic. So shadows and shading details would be part of a really realistic picture. If I were to simplify it, you can think of it kind of more like a cartoony L-shaped nosed. And then for an abstraction, again, changing the shapes. Sometimes I make edges a little bit sharper, kind of a little more geometric. And then for the shadow, rather than doing shading, maybe I just add a little pattern right there to represent a shadow. For the lips, again, same thing. This is going to end up looking like a cyclops, I know. For lips, for a realistic lip shape, again, follow along as well as you can. If you're feeling like I'm going too fast, just do your best to kind of follow the basic shapes I'm doing. And again, for simplified, taking away some of those details and making it simple. For an abstraction, again, changing those shapes Changing sizes of things. Maybe I'll go in and add some teeth for this one. So I'm not adding a realistic amount of teeth. I'll kind of overlap that bottom lip. So it can be pretty extreme, but we still want it to have the information that we need to represent a mouth. So you don't want it to be so crazy that we can't even recognize what it is anymore. So once you have this done, we're going to flip to the other side, and we're going to practice drawing a face in profile. Profile is the side view of a face. And everybody, no matter what you're choosing to do on your Picasso portrait, this is an example of 3 heads. Some of you might choose to just do 1. No matter what you do, there should be at least 1 side view in your image. This one happens to have 2 profile shots, or 2 profile views. So I want to practice one simple way of doing that. So on the back of your paper, we're going to practice making an abstract head. Start with an oval type shape. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to be abstracting these, so you can certainly change shapes as you go. And for the profile, I'll write that right there. We're going to start in the center of the face. Picasso is famous for showing multiple views at once, so the side view and the front view at the same time. So I'm going to start with my forehead. I'm going to jut out for the nose, come back in. I'm going to do 2 bumps for the lips and a curve for the chin, and come down for part of the neck. This part of the neck can even maybe continue in to the neck for the whole person. This profile is relatively realistic. I didn't really do a lot of shape changing, but now you can go in and maybe abstract some more things. Exaggerating sizes, putting things maybe in the wrong spot. So if I have an ear, just kind of adding random shapes in there to represent the ear. And maybe this side will have a totally different shape for the ear, but I still want it to represent an ear. So I'm still going to include details to show the interior of the ear. For the eyes, I'm going to do kind of a diamond shape here. And you can copy what I'm doing here or just kind of go off on your own and do some of your own abstractions. Even the eyebrow can be abstracted. For this part of the face, I'm going to add a second eye. I'm going to make that quite a bit bigger just so you can see how you can exaggerate size. And when you're adding hair, there's a variety of ways to do that. I like to stick with simple shapes rather than texture. So you'll be coloring in your final design later. So I don't want to do a lot of detail with texture at this point, because most of my colors are going to be colored in solid. Now this part of the face looks pretty empty, so I might even just continue a different part of the lip over here to fill that in. You can add dividing lines in kind of those emptier parts of the face too. And what I mean by dividing lines is you're just adding shapes to different parts of the picture to kind of break it up into sections. You don't need to do that too often, but a few here and there sometimes help break up those empty spaces. So obviously, sometimes these can look really ridiculous. You still want it to look like a human. You don't want it to end up looking like a monster or an animal or something beyond those human features. But it's an abstracted human, so things are going to be changed. These are a bunch of different examples of different ways that faces can be abstracted. Some you'll notice look kind of more cartoony. This looks much more geometric. That's getting a little more goofy. but most of them still have basic human features that are just changed a little bit. So go ahead and continue practicing if you want to, maybe add another face to the side if you want to, and then you'll be moving on to your final artwork. Remember, for your final, you're choosing between 1, 2, or 3 heads. Think about when you start your final, if you're doing 1 head, you'll most likely have your paper vertical, and if you're doing 3, it will most likely be horizontal.